All right, today's episode of The Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries is the case of a paranormal event. I'm your host, John. This is The Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. Let's get into the case of Carl Higdon. We're going to tell you a little bit about his story while we're drawing him, folks. By all accounts, 41-year-old well driller, husband, and father of four, Carl Higdon was not a man prone to fights or fancy, but on this crisp autumn afternoon of October 25th, 1974, he had a close encounter with a bizarre being who would not only test the limits of his imagination, but quite literally take him on the ride of his life. Like many of Americans in the 70s, the hard-working Carl Higdon was hit hard by the recession, and food prices crept even higher. Higdon decided that he would have to hunt in order to feed his family and stock their ice box with enough meat to get them through the harsh Wyoming winter that was just around the corner. So he decided to hunt elk. The day began like any other. Higdon awoke and getting ready for his second shift work day at the AM Well Service Company in Riverton when his telephone rang. After working his way up through the company for the better part of 20 years, Higdon was now the foreman, and therefore it fell to him to take sick calls from his crew. He described the situation. I was all set to leave for work when one of my key men phoned to tell me that he was sick. Realizing that nothing could be accomplished with him at home, I decided to take the day off. Carl utilized the free day off and decided to hunt some elk. He started on his way to McCarty Canyon in nearby Carbon County of the state of Wyoming, where he is from, where this happened. Now, he never hunted without his wife. This was the only time he decided to hunt without his wife. That's a key part to this story. It says he spotted some stranded motorists and helped them out on his way to the hunting expedition. He helped them out and was talking with them, and they told him there was a real good place to hunt elk because they were hunters also. Turned him on to a different spot than what he normally was accustomed to hunting at. He thanked him and went on his way and changed his course. Now that's important too to the story. He changed his course and went on his way to the new place that the other hunters told him about. Because after all, he was looking for elk, and they said there was a lot of elk. Once he got to the new destination, he was surprised to bump into an old buddy. Higdon and his compatriot then separated, at which point the hunter pulled out his brand new Magnum rifle and loaded it with powerful 7mm bullets. Higdon decided to explore an area that was concealed behind a hill and set off, never imagining what would happen next. Higdon walked for a few minutes, and then out of the corner of his eye he caught a flash of movement. It was exactly what it was he had come for, a small herd of elk. Higdon silently raised his heavy rifle, put his eye on the sight, and took aim at the largest male. It would be at this moment that Carl Higdon's world would take a decided twist towards the bizarre. As soon as Higdon pulled the trigger of his Magnum, he was astounded by the fact that there was no kickback from the rifle. What was even more perplexing was the fact that the destination was absolutely silent. In fact, according to Higdon, it was as if the entire world had fallen still. As if all that were not strange enough. For the first time in his life, Higdon claimed that he was actually able to watch as the bullet left the barrel of his rifle and soared toward so slowly that it looked as if it were traveling through a wall of invisible jello. Kind of like the Matrix kind of stuff right there. You know how they slow down everything in that movie? That's what he's describing there. Higdon later swore that he watched the bullet glide about 50 feet before it plummeted to the snow-speckled ground before him. And Higdon's still immersed in this eerie static-charged silence, Higdon cautiously retrieved the bullet and inspected it closely. They still have this today on evidence. It's a bullet that is like, it looks like a hit of titanium wall. He immediately noticed that the lead portion of the 7mm had disappeared and only the oddly misshapen case remained. He placed the bullet into his pocket and took a few perplexed steps forward. That was when the deathly silence surrounded him and was abruptly broken by the sound of a twig snapping. Higdon spun around and was confronted by a sight that he instantly knew was not of this earth. He was confronted by a visitor that had no left hand and a right hand shaped like a cone. And he had spikes coming out of his head instead of hair. Higdon would go on to depict this creature's oddly upsetting facial features, including a lipless, silt-like mouth not concealed, 3 exceptionally large teeth, not entirely unlike the notorious fanged humanoids of Khufu. On the top and bottom, a pair of antennas, and mostly alarmingly to Higdon, a face that blended directly into its neck. Higdon continued his disturbing view of this stranger. Stranger still was the fact this long-armed, bow-legged, jaundice-skinned creature had a pointy, almost drill bit-like appendage sticking out of its wrist, where its right hand ought to have been, and nothing at all on the left. At this point, the being slowly approached the terrified Higdon and did something completely unexpected. It asked him, "How are you doing?" The bewildered hunter admitted that he was trying to stay calm when he weakly responded, "Pretty good." At this point, the ostensible extraterrestrial, like any good host, inquired whether or not Higdon was hungry, but before he could respond, the creature sent a small, clear cellophane package floating towards him. The strange, jawless humanoid then introduced himself as Oso-1. That was when Higdon's gaze caught a strange box-like object catching the sun's rays in the clearing behind the strange creature. I believe it said Higdon did take the cellophane food product that the being gave him, thought about it for a minute, and then decided to take it. Apparently intrigued by the awe in which Higdon was staring at the ship, the alleged alien gamely asked the hunter, "You want to come along?" Higdon, fully aware of the fact that he was in no position to refuse this being any request, lamely shrugged his shoulders, innocent. It was at this point that time appeared to leap forward, as Higdon's next recollection was of being inside the cube-like craft. After Oso-1 loaded his earthly guest into his tiny, perhaps TARDIS-like box, Higdon's mind began to get fuzzy, and he started to panic. At this point, Higdon noticed that all 5 of the elk had been stalking just moments before were also in the cube behind what he perceived to be an invisible barrier. The hunter marveled at the creature's ability to incapacitate the untamed animals. It would seem that the elk were not the only things paralyzed, because of virtually the same moment as he saw the frozen beasts, Higdon claimed that he became abruptly aware of the fact that he was now sitting in a high-backed bucket seat with what he described as a restrictive band securing his arms and legs. Resisting what must have been an overwhelming urge to panic, Higdon watched in growing horror as other jawless, straw-haired beings appeared out of nowhere. At which point, and he and his genial partner strapped the bizarre, wire-smothered football helmet-like device on his head, prompting the hunter to state, "I felt like the monster in an old Frankenstein movie." Higdon then observed a console with 3 dissimilar levers, which also one used to control the craft. The alien pointed its hand at the longest lever and seemed to move it with telepathically. It was then that the peculiar transparent cube that Higdon would later describe as a flying box car took off. Oso-1 manipulated the vehicle so that it hovered above Higdon's truck, which with a point of his conical hand, the vehicle vanished before his eyes. When he got above the trees, Oso aimed his arm at my pickup, and it disappeared. Poof, vanished into thin air. And it goes on to tell you about how they hovered around this being's planet. The beings say that our sun burned them, and that's why they looked the way they looked. Also, one who had so cordially offered Higdon food, pills, and a ride around the cosmos did not explain the presence of the other humans, but patiently explained to the anxious oil man that they had touched down on a planet that was 163,000 light miles from Earth. At this point, they examined Mr. Higdon, and it goes on to explain that they examined him and abruptly stopped, and they told him, "We're not going to be able to use you," basically. So off they went to take him back to where he came from. Why couldn't they use him? Higdon later said it was because he thought it was because he had a hysterectomy. And, hysterectomy is your bodily functions in the sexual manner doesn't really work anymore. Higdon quickly realized that he was no longer hovering above an alien world, but that his alien comrade had his miraculous cube had seemingly instantaneously transported him back to Earth. He claimed that he saw his truck, which had been inexplicably transported some 5 miles from the glade where it had been parked 2.5 hours before. The hunter later was startled by this situation. At this point, the kindly spaceman said to the Earthling, "We'll see you." The foreman was overwhelmed by a floating sensation and without warning found himself standing on the edge of a steep rocky slope. The loose stones could not support his weight, and he suddenly found himself plummeting down the 9-foot decline, severely impacting against the hard ground and injuring his head, neck, and shoulder. It's important to make a note of this. In other abduction cases that I've listened to and heard about, they do say that they kind of just drop them. They don't really, when they're in the spacecraft and they're letting them go, they just literally let them go, not from a point that would kill them, but just a point that would, jar them physically and wake them up a little bit. 9-foot drop isn't going to kill you, but it's going to injure you and it's going to wake you up a little. You're definitely going to remember a 9-foot drop. So it says he was stuck in the mud basically after he was dropped, and he injured himself a little. He had to stagger back Higdon was in such a state of shock that he walked past his own pickup truck without even recognizing it. When he realized that he was utterly done, alone and done on the dirt road, he backtracked to his vehicle. Search party came and found Higdon, who recanted his tale, and it was put in the newspapers. I believe this happened in 74. A lot of people discounted this, didn't believe it, but a lot of people did. This is a mystery of Carl Higdon. Do you believe what happened to this man? And this is a paranormal case for the freedom to draw unsolved mysteries. The case of Carl Higdon. That does it for this episode. True believers, peace out.